So let's get started so we can try to stay on track. My name is Scott Delcourt. I'm the Associate Vice President for Graduate Studies. And I'm here to welcome you on behalf of myself and Vice President for Research and Dean Cody Vararamian. He was on the schedule, but he, as is typical this week before classes start, got called into an unexpected meeting with the President and some of the Vice Presidents. So he asked me to convey his regrets for not being able to be here today to welcome you, but and to assure you that we will be having some grad town meetings later in the semester, so you will have a chance to meet him. This is, on the one hand, I'm thrilled and pleased to be able to welcome grad students or grad TAs today back to a face-to-face orientation after 18 months of COVID pandemic contingency planning. Even with the masks, it's nice to actually be able to gather face-to-face on campus and see each other rather than on a screen all the time. Just out of curiosity, because we did extend the invitation for TA orientation this year to both the TAs that are joining us this fall, but also TAs that joined the University of Maine last year because of the fact that we didn't have a live face-to-face orientation program. And given the fact that we have now pivoted back from primarily a remote teaching and learning situation to something that's geared to more on campus, we wanted to make sure that TAs that didn't get that orientation last year were able to attend this year. So just a show of hands, how many of you are brand new to the University of Maine as TAs this fall? So most of you. Okay, so what we hope to do throughout the course of the day, it's going to be a little bit different, I think, than previous orientations in that we certainly want to give you the tools and some of the information you need to be successful in the classroom. But because it's still on our mind, I think we'll also throughout the course of the day try to help you as new TAs in terms of navigating some of the issues that may come up in relation to COVID in classrooms, particularly masking and vaccinations and quarantine and some of the other issues. So that will be interweaved through the sessions that we have today.
All right, so hopefully you've had a chance to chat a little bit. I'm just getting used to this whole microphone thing. And I wanted to hear from you guys, hear what ideas that you had for what are the things you do to learn content, ideas, skills, problem solving, whatever it is that you do in your field. What do you do to learn when it's hard? So would someone be willing to share an idea either that you heard from your group or an idea you had yourself? I'm sorry, I wasn't able to walk around and pre-pick you. Yes, thank you. And can you say a little bit about why, so why it helps to see maybe a video or two videos about a concept? Why is that useful?
So I feel like it's because it's more interactive and you can take it to your own rhythm too. So you can pause it and take notes and understand really the concepts that you're trying to learn and then continue once you gain that information.
Okay, did some other group mention anything like that, like watching videos or something and have an additional reason for why it's useful? You guys, front.
Sometimes two people can teach the same thing, but mention slightly different examples, or there's slightly different perspectives, or there's just like one look.
Yeah, so sometimes it's really helpful to hear or see an explanation of a concept in multiple ways from multiple perspectives. And sometimes that comes in the form of just hearing it differently. Sometimes it could be you need a picture and you've heard it in words, but the picture really helps you. Has anyone had that situation where you've heard the words, but then someone draws a picture or you draw a picture and all of a sudden it's much clearer to you? That happens to me a lot. So other ideas, either similar to this theme or different? Yes. Ah, okay. So you said two things. You said ask questions and you had talk to your peers. And so once you ask a question, sometimes you get an answer and that can be useful. But those of you who might be in psychology or who have taken some classes might have learned, might know this already, but just the process of asking a question and forming the question in your head before you say it out loud, that actually helps you process the information. So one of the things that happens fairly regularly in the math classes when I'm walking around is a student will raise their hand and they'll have a question and they'll say the question out loud. And then immediately after they say the question, they go, oh, wait, now I know what the answer is. Yeah, I assume that that laughter means you guys have had maybe had similar experiences. So know that just the process of asking a question can help you reorganize the ideas in your head and come to a deeper understanding of the ideas, in addition to asking a question and getting an answer, which is also can be very, very useful. Other things that came up. Yes, sir. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a theme going on here too, right? So what was being shared here was taking your own notes and having to process the information, figuring out how to write it for yourself is similar to some of these other ideas of hearing another way of thinking about it, not just the professors or the video person's one, but your own. That can be really, really valuable. Yep, another thing, Cody?
It's an extension of what he was just saying is that we mentioned in our group that it's important we feel it's important for us to be able to work through problems on our own. If we have a slew of resources available to us, it can sometimes be beneficial for our learning to kind of bang our head against the wall for a while and struggle through it and get as far as we can on our own. Or just another student in the class that knows more, just being able to have resources that you can work through a problem. When you reach a breaking point, you can know where to find help and then move forward again on your own. Work through the problem itself.
Yeah, so this whole idea, you may have heard this phrase. If not, you may encounter it at a bunch here. What we really, really like is for students, you and the undergraduates you'll be working with, to engage in productive struggle. So learning doesn't happen when you think about ideas you already know well. And learning doesn't happen when the ideas that you're trying to learn are beyond your reach. You can't get there. Where learning happens is in this space between what I can do on my own and what's too hard for me yet. Things that I can do by either sitting down and thinking and looking at a bunch of resources or talking to someone else. And I keep doing this because there's this concept called the zone of proximal development. It's the space where I can learn something because it's between what I can do alone and what I would need someone else to do for me. It's what I can do with the help of someone else. And that sort of productive struggle is where the learning happens. And figuring out how to get there or get yourself there, you've probably figured out how to do that over the years in school. But that's what we're trying to help our undergraduates experience as well, is this space of learning things where it's a little hard for them, but not so hard that they get discouraged. Just want to throw out one other little tidbit of information. You said something about time and it taking time. You want to guess on a survey of 8th graders, how long did the 8th graders think they should work on a math problem before giving up and declaring it was too hard and they were never going to be able to solve it? How about raise your hand with the number of minutes you think they said? How many minutes do you think they said? If you don't have enough fingers, that's okay. Just put them all up. Everyone vote. How many minutes do you think 8th graders think you should work on a problem? Yeah. So a bunch of you are saying like 2. That's about what it is. So imagine if in your schooling, you had given up after 2 minutes of working on a problem, not to take a break or to look at a video or to talk to a friend, but you gave up and you said, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to solve this problem because I wasn't able to solve it in 2 minutes. And if you think back to your own experience being a younger kid in school, there are lots of things that you may have experienced that might have led you to believe that. Think about things where it was like, okay, here's a list of these problems, do them. And the idea was that the faster you did them, the faster you could go out to recess, or the faster you did them, the faster you could do something else. And we have time tests, right? So we send a lot of messages to kids that doing things faster is better. And you all have learned from your own experiences now that that's not necessarily the case. So keep that in mind, that a lot of the students you're going to be working with may think that if they can't get that answer in 2 minutes, they should just walk away because they're never going to be able to do it. So I want to gather a couple more things. I think I said, was there a hand up over here? Yes, in the back there, you guys. Mm-hmm. So you can, whoops, can't do all of this with just 2 hands. So seeking out other resources that, in this case, it's Stack Overflow. It's a site you can go to and you can ask questions. There are tons of them for all sorts of disciplines, not just computer science, but basically you're trying to seek out some other source of information. So something else that you heard one of the people you were talking with say that you think belongs on this list of things we do when the learning is hard? Yes, back there. And what is it that you think, why is it that you think that that is helpful? I agree that it is. What's good about that? Ah. So not only can you ask someone else or something else for a different way of thinking about the ideas, you can actually ask yourself by waiting a little while. You may have had this experience. I have it all the time with writing. I will write something, I'll set it aside for a few days, I'll come back, and I'll see things in the sentences and the structure of the writing that I didn't see before, even though I was the one who wrote it. The same thing can be true in doing a problem. You might try it and do it, and then you set it aside, come back to it, you may see it in a different light. So this take a break thing, which is also part of what you had in there, can be a really, really useful thing as well. And it goes back to that, it connects up to that idea that how long should it take you? Well, it might take you longer when you need to take longer than you first thought, because you find out you have to take a break to be able to see the problem differently and come back and attack it. Yeah. So this is a great list. And I've done this activity every year here and my previous institution with tons of graduate students and faculty. And every time the list that gets generated includes these things and other things that are related to this. And the reason, and I'll tell you 2 things about that. One, this is the list of stuff that we know from research on teaching and learning. We know these are exactly the right things to do to learn things when the learning is hard. And so that's thing 1, know that these are the right things. And the reason that you guys and everyone else who does this activity who's a graduate student or a faculty member, the reason you can generate such a good list is because you have figured out how to learn when the learning is hard. You wouldn't be sitting here as graduate students if you hadn't figured that out. You are expert learners at this point. And so there's a lot that we can do to draw on your expertise as a learner to help you make decisions in the classroom for your students. Because unlike you, some of the students you encounter may not yet be expert learners. For some of them, they've been really expert and they came to college, and the class you're going to be seeing them in next week for the first time may be the first time that that subject was hard. So remember when I asked you to think about when something was hard for you? Your class that you're teaching may be that class for some of the students. And so I'm going to tell you a couple of things that we know about teaching and learning, but the big message is when you're thinking about what to do for your students, think not about what you would have wanted to learn that content necessarily, because it may be content you learned in high school, may have been really, really easy for you, especially if you're teaching in your subject area. What you need to think about is what would you need to learn what would you need to learn if this content was hard, and try to provide those opportunities for your students. So I'm going to tell you just a couple of things that we know from research. Lecture can be great. You can learn a lot from a lecture. However, it's been around a really, really, really long time, for many, many centuries now. And most courses are still, college courses are still taught in this form. So, and it has been found that lecture alone is usually not sufficient to learn, especially when the content is hard. You guys didn't list lecture. I've done this activity 1,000 times. Well, now, probably with 1,000 people at least. And people don't ever say that they just watch a lecture passively. They might say something like they watch a video, but when the video was mentioned, it was, you can go at your own pace, you can pause it. You might say you would seek out information from someone, but that's in a dialogue, not just watching lecture. Plenty of good things can come from lecture, but it's hard to learn really hard ideas specifically from lecture. I will say that if you weren't an undergraduate here, and you are a first-year graduate student, a lot of the faculty and graduate students here on this campus do things different and not just use lecture. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But the idea would be the big message, diversifying the ways that people have opportunities to learn can be really, really valuable. Lecture alone, not so good. Some other things alone might not be so good, but diversifying these things can be very, very useful. And I'll just tell you quickly about a couple of pieces of research that were done on this. So there was this gigantic meta-analysis. So what a meta-analysis is when someone says, there have been, in this case, 225 studies about this one thing. Let's look across all of them and see if we can see if there are trends, so that we can be even more confident in our findings, that it's not just an individual study. So some folks did this meta-analysis, and what they did was they said, let's look at classrooms that are traditional lecture, person at front talking, nothing else going on, and compare the outcomes from those classes to the outcomes in classes where anything else is going on in addition to that. So it might be what I asked you guys to do, which was to talk to each other. It might be things with clickers. Some of you may be familiar with personal response systems. It could have been group work. It could have been anything. And what they found was that students in the not lecture, in the active learning classes, were 1.5 times more likely to succeed in the course and to get a higher grade. And so the conclusion of this meta-analysis was that any form of increased engagement of students is going to help them. And so a lot of faculty here on this campus and graduate students have been trying to take to heart this information and doing things like having active components to lectures, even when you're in a classroom like this, that isn't really designed. As Peter was saying, this room was not designed for you guys to be able to work together, as evidenced by the way it's set up, and that the chairs don't turn, and that for me to interact with you, I have to run up and down these crazy stairs, which I'm happy to do, but isn't ideal. So let's see. There are many, many benefits to active learning. One of them is that it helps all students learn, especially when the material is hard. And many students will come in to a course in the college and they may not have strong preparation in all of the things that you are expecting, or in all the things that you had strong preparation in when you came into that course. And so the active learning part can really, really help with that, because they have an opportunity to talk to someone, and maybe that other student does remember the double angle formula or whatever it is that you need to remember, and can help them out. So it helps close those gaps in their preparation. And it also has a special add-on benefits for people who are from underrepresented minority groups, and for women in fields where there's a gender gap between achievement of men and women. And so the last thing I'll say is that some of these studies have concluded and found that it's really those first 2 years in college that make a real difference in whether our students are going to succeed or not. Makes sense, right? If you don't get off to a good start in those first 2 years, it's not going to go so well. And so those are the ones where it's very, very important for us to be engaging students actively and doing what we can to help them learn. And you can help. You folk are going to be the ones, for the most part, who are in contact with the undergraduates. When I'm teaching a calculus class, I got 75 students here. I hope to get to know them. I hope there's something active going on. But you will largely be in situations where you get to know those undergraduates better, and you have more of an opportunity to have an impact on them and to help them learn how to learn. And you already know all the answers because you succeeded in getting here and figuring out how to learn when the learning is hard. And all you need to do is to tap into that. So when you're thinking about how to plan your class, think about what it is that you would have wanted in that really, really hard class, or the other things that you have learned along the way that have helped you be a really successful student. And as Scott mentioned, if you are in a science, math, engineering, technology, psychology, if you're in some STEM-related discipline, we have some particular sessions for you. Some of them are this afternoon if you're doing a laboratory, but then we have other ones on Friday. And so I just wanted to let you know that if you are in one of these disciplines and you would like more of the sort of active learning, hands-on opportunities to learn about facilitating group work, strategies for motivating students, and also things about preparing for your first day, you can go ahead and register for this. We're trying to get a sense of, as Scott mentioned, there's a little bit of a registration snafu. So if you are interested, please register so that we'll know that there are enough people who are interested in it. I will leave this up for a moment. I can also make the QR code larger. You guys know about this, QR codes? If you take out your phone, you open up your camera and you point it at that, it will open up the website for the registration. And I'll put this up at the end of today as well. I'll be doing the session helping you prepare for your first day. And there's the, and yeah, if you are planning to come to the Friday session, it would be really helpful if you came to this afternoon's 4 o'clock session where we're doing, we're gonna be watching some video of teachers on their very first day of class so that we can start thinking about what the impressions are we want to give to our students and what the things are we want to do with our students on the very first day of class. And then if you come to the Friday one, you'll have a chance to actually practice that first 5 minutes, standing up in front of a room, talking to people, which can be very, very helpful, reducing the stress. Okay, and without further ado, I will hand this to someone who will hand it.
This is such perfect timing. So as I was mentioning earlier, when I did the introductions at the start and the overview, we're really, really thrilled to be in a situation where we could actually come out and meet people face to face. This wasn't the situation last fall. So I'm very happy to introduce the Provost of the University of Maine. Dr. John Volin is the Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost. Prior to joining the UMaine community in August 2020, he served as Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at the University of Connecticut. Dr. Volin was a professor of natural resources and the environment at UConn, where he served a decade as department head and conducted research in ecosystems around the world. focusing on invasive species and restoration ecology. Dr. Vollen also directed UConn's Interdisciplinary Environmental Sciences program and co-founded the EverSource Energy Center. We're very pleased to have him with us today. I've had a chance to get to know him over the past year since he joined us last fall. Meet with him and Vice President Vararamian usually about once a month, and I'm a member of the Dean's Council, so we work closely along with the other deans. So please introduce Dr. Vollen.
Thanks a lot, Scott. How's it going? All right, you're going to be TAs. You got to get your crowd going, right? So how many of you have been TAs before? All right, so most are fairly new, right? Are you excited? Are you nervous? No, you're not nervous? What are you teaching? Oh, come on, that's great. You should be up here. That's awesome. So, well, welcome. How many of you were undergraduates last year? Right, so this is like a big step. I remember that big step, right? So I went to grad school for a few years, right, back in the day. And I was always a research assistant. And then, but I wanted to get teaching experience. So I volunteered as a TA. And it like, okay, I'm a professor, right? It was one of the best experiences I had ever had. And I remember, for those of you that are going to be doing this for the first time, yeah, I understand there's some butterflies or whatever. That's a good thing, right? It's really exciting to do this. And I want to tell you, so yes, as Scott said, I've been here a year. And before I was at Connecticut, I was in Southern Florida working in the Everglades. I worked in the Everglades for over 20 years. I've had a number of graduate students that I've been the advisor, over 30 graduate students. I still have one PhD student left who's going to finish this summer, but hopefully by December, fingers crossed. But I've been, on dozens and dozens as an associate advisor. It is one of the really great things, is you're entering graduate school. So you become peers of the faculty, right? You are faculty, right? And that's really exciting. And the other thing is, many of you, how many of you working with first and second year students? Right, a lot of you, right? And that's exciting, and it brings its own challenges, right? And you are so important, and there are a lot of resources here, and you're learning about them, of how you can get better in the classroom, and when there's issues and things like that. So congratulations on this. Use this time well, and I will just share. I want to share just one other little thing. So yes, we are still in the pandemic, but this is exciting. Last year we were on Zoom, right? I've met so many people that I met weekly on Zoom this last year, and we come up to each other and go, "Is that you?" And I was actually in the union the other day when we still didn't have the mask, didn't come back, right? So we had about a month there without the mask, or a little bit longer. And so I was walking through, and because I get lunch every day there, and some of the people that work there, like 5 of them came up to me and said, "Is that you, John?" It's like, "Yeah, this is John." He goes, "Oh, wow." And it was really interesting because, this is hard. You'll find that this is a little bit hard teaching. Those are extra little challenges, but just go with it, right? Everyone, the thing that we do have right now is we have this, right? There's already a stronger human connection by doing this. And while a lot of students have said that, they actually are very comfortable doing the online and the Zoom, the reality is the data that's coming out is showing that that's not really a great learning environment overall. There are cases where it's amazing, cases that, it really works well, and a lot that it doesn't. So you guys, you're hugely important here. And this university, so even though we were in this pandemic, and Scott's heard me say this 10 times, so I apologize, Scott, but universities do this, and hopefully they're constantly advancing, right? But sometimes they take these like big jumps, these, phase shifts, if you will. And I think kind of that's where we're at right now. Maine is really ascending. How many of you have heard of the Alphon gift? The Harold Alphon gift from last year, right? So that is a $240 million gift, right? That came to the University of Maine system that's going to be here over the next 10 years that we'll be implementing it. There's many different aspects to that, but one of the big aspects is the focus on student success, right? And that's where you guys are all really heavily involved. And part of that, there's 3 major initiatives. One will be, we will be working very much on those gateway courses. What's a gateway course? And what are they often called? What are they called, Scott? The big gateway courses. All right. Good. Yeah, these are the courses that are the make or break courses, right? These are the courses where a lot of our students, yeah, please. Weed out courses, that's the word I was looking for, right? And God, that's awful, right? That is actually, you know, there are names, there's other names too for it that are, you know, we probably shouldn't say. But the reality is, you know, we accept 92% of the students that apply to the University of Maine. That's a high number. But we are a land grant public university. We should be doing that. But what that means is you're going to have students coming with all kinds of abilities. Those that have those foundational skills and those that need some help. Gateway courses, the weed out courses are tough, right? We're going to work on those, right? Well, we've been working on it for years, but the reality is that we can do even more. We're doing these research learning experiences. So if you get involved with that, you'll have the chance where the students, actually right now, over 10% of the first year students are here on campus already, right? We just started that this summer. And Fatty, this is one thing about UMaine, and I hope you've all thought, how many of you from UMaine as undergrads? So give me some other places where you're from, just yell them out. Right? Yeah, this is what I love. This is what I love. I actually got goosebumps, you can't see it. But the reality is, this is the beautiful thing about a university, right? Is people coming from everywhere together, mixing together, bringing all these experiences, right? So we have over 10% of the first year students right now here on campus doing a bridge week, learning about research foundations, and they're going to enter into a research learning experience course. So by the end of the semester, they will actually be producing knowledge, not just consuming it, right? That's the difference that you all are going to be doing now, right? A lot of you had, how many of you had an independent study or internship as an undergrad, right? How many, well, get your hands up there, come on. How many of you did that in your freshman year? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's uncommon. Well, in 3 or 4 years from now, we are going to scale it for all students across the university, right? And TAs are going to play a major role in that, right? So, well, welcome to the University of Maine. I know I've gone way over my time, Scott, apologies, but that's what administrators do. So anyway, if you see me on campus, just stop me. I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to know what you're up to. It'd be wonderful. So thank you.
My name is Ken DeShealy, and we'll each introduce ourselves as it becomes our turn to talk. I am the Associate Vice President for Student Life and Senior Associate Dean of Students. One thing I'll say, in the Division of Student Life, we're basically everything outside the classroom that doesn't make money. So we're not dining, and we're not housing, and we're not the bookstore because they make money. So we're everything outside the classroom that does not make any money. So there you go. But we're things like the rec center, residence life, the counseling center, the career center, veteran center. Anila and Sarah will talk about what they do, but student accessibility services, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Bodwell Center for Service and Volunteerism, campus activities, student organizations, and Greek life. Those are all student life. So that just gives you a flavor of who we are. Yeah, I might need some assistance with the clicking. There we go. Yeah, but coordinating with what I'm talking, that's like multitasking. So anyway, there's some really good phone numbers for you to know about. The things I think that you might, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, but the SBRT is the Student Behavior Review Team. And One thing I know I need to let you all know is the student behavior review team came into existence after Virginia Tech. I'm sure you're all aware of the tragedy that happened at Virginia Tech University. And one of the big things that came out of the sort of post-vention or post-review of that incident was that a lot of people knew a lot of stuff, but it was never coordinated in any way. The English professor knew about some very troublesome writings. The counseling center knew about some things. The Res Life folks knew about some things, but nobody coordinated it. Nobody, my glasses are fogging up. So anyway, so that what came out of the recommendations after that is pretty much every school now has, sometimes they call it a BIT or behavior intervention team. Sometimes they call it a care team. In our case, we call it very descriptively student behavior review team. So what I would say to you is if someone hasn't gone to class, don't wait for like 2 weeks to go by. They haven't gone to class and they haven't communicated to you or responded to you, let us know. And just because you refer somebody it doesn't mean they're in trouble. In fact, it's just the opposite. The student behavior review team is designed to try to nip problems in the bud before they become major insurmountable things to the student. So it could be something like a roommate issue. It could be a financial issue. It could be any number of things. And so our message to you is don't let too much time go by. You know, outreach to the student if they're not emailing you. The other thing and we have a website for the student behavior review team. I'd encourage you to go there because there's some great helpful information there. Just go on the Student Life website and look up SBRT or student behavior on the Maine site. It'll pull it right up. But we have a great deal of information about some of the things to look for. Because I don't know, how many of you are psychology grad students? Okay, we got a couple. The rest of us are not psychology people. So, you know, we don't expect you to understand or know necessarily all the signs of anybody that might be in mental distress. But there are some obvious physical signs that anybody can notice. And those are the kinds of things that we can all take responsibility for to help our students. The bias response team. Anila and I are the co-chairs, and you'll hear from Anila a little bit later, is really to address the community impact of bias and hate behaviors on campus. So for example, a student or an employee does something particularly egregious that might be considered discriminatory or biased or hate motivated. There are processes to deal with that person. EO and HR for an employee, student conduct, and other types of processes for students. Our job in the in the bias response team is to be dealing with the community impact. Some of the times the impact is very small because it happens and very few people know about it. It could be in a residence hall, it could be in a classroom. But sometimes the impact is quite large. And so what Anila and I do, we have a group of folks that meet, and we make recommendations to our vice president for student life, who then informs the president about what the recommended response is. A lot of times that will take the format of a sort of a public statement put out by Dr. Dana, who is the vice president for student life, and the president about how this is the type of thing that we do not tolerate here at the University of Maine. It's about respecting everybody. Difference is positivity. I mean, the more different our campus, the more diverse our campus is, the better we all, or the more we all benefit from it. So those are the kinds of messages we send forth, and that's the kind of response, that's a very common response, but there might be very pointed or very specific responses depending on the circumstance. So again, you can report bias, and there's a website there, and you can report and give your name or not. It's up to you. Same thing with the student behavior review team. There's a way to report anonymously, or you can call that number at the top, 581-1406. And then there's the number for international programs. So it's not just me, huh? All right. So that's sort of like the student behavior routine. That's sort of the trajectory of violence or concern, if you will. You guys are going to be responsible for classroom behavior. If you supervise students, whether they be as student employees, or when you grow up and you actually become wherever it is you're going to become, and you actually supervise other people, then you're going to supervise employees. And so generally that's managed at the supervisor level. You manage your classrooms or your labs. Your bosses manage you, their bosses manage them, that kind of thing. But then the behavior review team, that's when things are a little bit more than or more frequent, more concerning because of something somebody said or did. Then you're going to want to refer it. If you have the thought, because we all have a gut instinct, And I think as we become a more civilized society, we sometimes ignore our gut instinct. If you think, maybe I should refer that, that's enough for you to go ahead, because there's no harm in referring, nothing at all. And you can stay involved as much in the situation as you feel comfortable doing. Some of that's going to depend on who you are, what experiences, and how confident you feel in your skills. Some of that's going to be depending on how well you know the student. So don't worry about that. We can work with you. You can refer and walk away. We'll work with you about how you want to manage your role in the situation. But if you think about doing it, so the whole goal of the student behavior review team is to try to find a way to keep the student enrolled and on campus. But sometimes, thankfully very rare, it gets to the point where it becomes a consideration of whether the student should stay on campus because of the threat they seem to or might pose to the campus community in general. And then it transitions from behavior review team to threat assessment. Thankfully, that's very rare. But you need to know that there are folks on this campus that are trained to make those kinds of decisions. And it all usually starts with the referral to the student behavior review team. So any questions I can answer, any concerns about how that might work for you guys? Okay, next then. Student conduct. On our campus, we call it community standards. Your involvement with community standards is probably going to be 3 areas: classroom management, lab management, behavior management in your classroom. So my biggest #1 thing I would recommend that you do is make sure you have those expectations in your syllabus. What are you going to tolerate? If you want, and we'll talk about COVID later, but right now through the end of September is everyone, no matter their vaccination status, must wear a mask inside. If that's what you expect, what are you going to do if they don't? Say what you're going to do. You're going to ask them to leave. You're going to refer them to student conduct. One or both of those. Those are 2 very easy things to say. But I think that the more you can tell people in your syllabus what you expect and what you're going to do if they don't, the better off you are. The other one is the academic integrity. I would encourage you to say as much as you can about that as well. The University of Maine system has an academic integrity policy that is system-wide enforced. It's, in my opinion, unduly detailed and difficult to do, but they didn't ask me, so we do it. But if you need help managing a student who you think has somehow cheated on a test or an assignment or whatever, you can call the Community Standards Office, which is the same number as that Dean of Students, 581-1406, and they can help you manage that. Your @1 contact for academic integrity is David Fiacco, DAVID.Fiacco, FIACCO @maine.edu. You can email him as well. But he's our sort of academic integrity guru. And the other thing is, if you want to get involved, if you have sort of a interest in student conduct, we always need students because under our conduct code, which is also system-wide, we must have at least 1 student, grad or undergrad, on every conduct code committee to which we refer a student. There's the trainings. There's 3 trainings. You only need to go to 1. If you're interested, you email me. That's me and my email address, and I will send you the information about how to sign up. There's a Google form, and it's not a physical presence. It's like one of those Zoom things or whatever they do. You don't have to physically go anywhere. But we really do need students to participate. So if you have an interest and if you get contacted and you're trained and you can't do it, you just say you can't do it. I mean, it's all the conduct hearings are based on the availability of the conduct code panel itself. So you can participate, and even after that, if it doesn't work out for you because of your own schedule, that's fine. But I really would, and so those are the trainings. But if you're interested, I can send you more information about how to sign up to be registered for the trainings, and that would be great. And the chances are you could, because it's a system-wide committee, you could end up hearing a case from Farmington, or you could end up hearing a case from USM, and vice versa. A student here might end up with a case that the student panel member ends up being from Fort Kent or Presque Isle or someplace like that. So go ahead. So at the top there, I don't think you can see it, but there are certain classes of people that under federal law are considered protected, and this is that list. So you cannot discriminate against anybody. That means entry to class, that means grades, that means any potential opportunity based on these criteria. So if, for example, there are some classes, and I'm going to use, at the Darling Marine Center, they have a deep sea diving class, okay? As part of that class, they have to share a regulator as part of the training to get certified to go deep sea diving, okay? So they didn't have it this year because of the COVID nonsense. So what we have to do, so we couldn't say that only vaccinated people could take that class, right? Because that's HIPAA protected information. So what they did is they basically said you had to be able to perform these duties. And so that's what you say, the regulations to enter your class, the regulations or the criteria on which you provide a certificate or a accreditation or whatever it is that you are providing must be performance-based and not based on any of these things. Does that make sense? So it's not like everybody under 5'5" fails, although that would be fine with me, but anyway, I'm just kidding. But it's that you have to meet certain criteria, certain performance criteria that are not based on basically any physical characteristic, all right? That's, but if you have any questions about that, whether you feel like you've been discriminated against, or if you have a question about whether or not any of the criteria that you need to put in place for your class to achieve whatever outcome you're looking for, you want help writing those, we can help you with that, okay? Next one, thank you. And now we have to talk about sexual harassment because we have to talk about it because it's required by federal law. There are two types of sexual harassment. Quid pro quo, which is Latin for this, for that. That's when you say, I'll give you an A if you have sex with me. I'll pass this class if you'll pass this class if you do, write all my papers for me. That kind of thing. That's sexual harassment because that's quid pro quo. I'll do this for you if you do that for me. The other one is hostile environment, which is probably the more common one actually. And that is whether you allow in your classroom or your lab for there to be the kinds of comments that would degrade men or women or anyone for that matter, based on their gender, based on their gender expression, based on their national origin, how they look, how they dress. Those are all things that could be considered sexual harassment. And so you have to be paying attention to what the conversations are. If you set up a Facebook page, I, by the way, hate Facebook. But anyway, if you set up a Facebook page or some kind of chat or some kind of private thing that just your students, because it's easier to do whatever it is you want to do, you got to pay attention to what they're saying on that. Because you can't let them run amok. You think about it, most of the kids that we're seeing, I don't know how many of you are going to teach entry-level courses, but imagine most of you are teaching 100 and 200 level courses. Yeah, a lot of kids straight out of high school. You got to think about it. For almost 2 years, they have had some kind of modified experience. And now they're here and they're going to be touching each other because they haven't had a chance to do that for 2 years. So we'll get into that when I talk about Title IX. But anyway, but yeah, so you got to watch what they're saying to each other. And be careful about what kind of private information you require. And ask yourselves, is it really required? Because you don't want to get in a situation where you've basically enabled some folks to do some kind of bad things to each other. Because at the end of the day, you have to think about these students too, is that they are not as mature as they were 5 years ago. And this group, and because you're going to have first and second year students who really haven't had much of a college experience. They really haven't. It's always been, and even now it's going to be closer to normal, but it's still not going to be absolutely normal. So keep that in mind as you think about setting these sorts of chats or special groups up, whether they be email or whatever it is. Pay attention to what they're doing. Go ahead and change that if you would. Thank you, Anila. So these are some things just for your information. And I think, are we going to make this presentation available to them? So you'll get this presentation available to you so you can actually read the slides if you want to. I'm not going to go through every single one. Go ahead. So these are the resources. Besides the Dean of Students Office, I supervise Title IX student services. And so there's a new woman in Title IX student services. Her name is Heather Hogan. Her email is heather.hogan@maine.edu, Hogan. And the way we divide up the work is, if it's student-on-student sexual harassment, it's handled by Title IX Student Services. If a student is complaining about an employee, a faculty member, then it's handled by EO, but we in Student Life support the student making the complaint. If an employee is complaining about a student, we will manage the student through the conduct code or through some University of Maine system policy, and EO supports the employee. Does that make sense? You as grad students are considered students for purposes of the conduct code and for purposes of Title IX, because your primary role here, while you are employed, and maybe the reason you're able to go to school is like it was for me when I was in school, was because I had a graduate assistantship. You're still considered a student first. Okay, does that make sense? All right. That's all right. Go ahead. So this gives you a little bit more information about what hostile environment sexual harassment or harassment is. So hostile environment can just be one incident. Usually it's a pattern of behavior, like you allow certain things to happen on your chat, or you allow certain things to be in your office, or you allow certain kinds of things in your while you're on campus or while you're representing the University of Maine or your department. But it can be one single event. If someone is accused under the conduct code of sexual assault, that almost necessarily also includes sexual harassment, because sexual assault would be like the most extreme version of sexual harassment, if that makes sense. There we go. It can be verbal, nonverbal, or physical contact. So understand that. And just about everything must be consented to. I deal with a lot of students in a lot of crises, you know, and it's not unusual for people to cry in my office. And despite what the rumor is, I don't make them cry. They just cry on their own. And you feel like you really want to hug them and let them know that there's somebody here that cares about them and that wants them to do well. I always ask, even in the most, is it okay if I hug you? Is it okay if I do this? And I would recommend you get in that habit as well. I think Calvin, right? It took me a second to say, I'm old and sometimes, Calvin and I just met today. He extended his hand. I said, it's okay. Yep. I said, I got chalk on my hand. He's fine. Okay. Even at that minimal contact, you want to ask permission. I just think you just need to get in the habit of it. It might be different than what you're used to, but I would recommend it just to make sure that everybody is clear about what's going to happen. And that is particularly true if you're meeting with students one-on-one. And I would recommend, unless there's a need for it to be particularly confidential, that you leave your door open when you meet with students. And if you're in an office, that's particularly true if your office has no windows in the door. That's just practical advice there. So, and I can't imagine that there would be too many circumstances that would be so private. If somebody says to you, either in a conversation, through a classroom assignment like a lab report or a paper that they might write for you, that they've been sexually assaulted or they're in an abusive relationship or they can't go home because of the home situation, you must report. Even if this is not a new thing, even if they say this has been going on for years, you must report. Where do you report? We'll tell you. Go ahead. Go ahead. So, I had forgotten to mention this. I will get to you about where you report. You have to understand too that as a grad student, even though many of you maybe were undergrads just last year, there is a power differential there. You have a lot to say about their academic life and what the outcome will be in terms of grade, in terms of any kind of evaluation of their academic performance is on you. So there is an automatic power differential. So you're already set up because most of the time when we see quid pro quo or hostile environment, sexual harassment, it's because there is a power differential. There's nothing wrong with power differentials. You just have to be aware of that so that you understand. That's why you ask permission to do things. That's why, because otherwise people will feel like you're pressuring them to have the hug or to do something. And so you always need to ask, unless it's a class requirement, but if it's a more of a personal thing, like a shaking the hand or getting a hug, you're going to want to ask permission. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions or concerns about that? I'd be happy to entertain any of those. Okay. What do you think about Facebook friend requests? Did you be Facebook friends with kids in your class? No, no. No. However you say that most strongly, no. I had some grad students a couple years ago actually visiting students in the residence hall. No. Going to the football game with them. No. 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 Don't do it. As long as you are their instructor, do not have any social engagement with them. I know that sounds very cold, but please don't. It's just going to go sideways. It will no doubt be misinterpreted. It will not necessarily by you. I think it's unlikely actually it would be you, but the other person would misinterpret that. Socialize amongst your peers or with people with whom you don't teach. So if they were your student last semester, but they're not your student this semester, what do you think? Good idea? It's not impermissible, probably not the best idea, but there's nothing that says that you shouldn't do it. Other than my personal recommendation, which you can take that for what it's worth. You hardly know me, so, you know. Going for coffee, same kind of deal. All right. Now, if you went as a group, if you took the whole class, whole different story. You know what I mean? Don't single out small groups or individuals. Do it for all of them or do it for none of them. Make sense? Okay, thank you. Boundaries are crucial. I don't know if you can read that in red at the bottom there, but it says boundaries are crucial. Quid pro quo, I think we already talked about that. The university has a consenting relationships policy, which basically says, say you get into a romantic relationship with an office mate, so someone on your same level. You're supposed to inform your supervisor. Now, the question becomes, when does interest turn into something you need to report? Any ideas? Well, this is what I would recommend. And this is not written anywhere, so it's just my recommendation. So again, just you can take it for what it's worth. When interest transition, because we have actually more problems with this with our RAs, who are undergraduate students living in the residence halls. We say you cannot date your resident. Can't happen. If they do, remove them. I mean, if they tell us that they're interested in a resident that lives in their hall or in their floor, then we move them to a different hall. Because RAs have supervisory responsibility over these people. And they can write them up for noise. They can get them in trouble with the student conduct office. They can do all kinds of stuff. So there's a power differential. So I think part of the thing is to look about or to consider is whether or not there's a power differential between you and maybe your office mate or somebody like that. But you have when interest goes from just being interested to dating, then I think you have to let your supervisor know. That would be my opinion. And I consider dating to be the sort of one-on-one kind of go out and date, not the group stuff. If everybody's going out and the whole office is going out, I wouldn't necessarily count that. But if it if it graduates from that kind of social interaction to sort of more of the one-on-one, then I think it's time to let your supervisor know. Go ahead. So we have to give you this whole big definition of what rape is. I think that is something we need to do. Rape is basically sexual contact, which is not necessarily intercourse. It can be grabbing a boob, grabbing a butt, grabbing a crotch, that kind of thing, all considered sexual assault, even through clothing, okay? All that happens without consent, it's technically a sexual assault. Fondling your knee, somebody else's knee. Incest is obviously someone that you are not allowed to marry under Maine state law and you have sex with them, that's considered incest. Generally speaking, that's first cousins or closer. And statutory rape is someone who statutorily cannot give consent. In the state of Maine, you cannot give consent for sexual activity under the age of 16. And even when you're 16, it can only be for people within a certain age range. I lose track of what that is, but 16-year-olds cannot consent to have sex with 20-year-olds. They could conceivably have sex with an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old. At least that's the way it used to be. So statutory rape is where you have sex with somebody who statutorily cannot give consent. So always a good idea to know the age of someone that you might have sexual contact with. So Dating and domestic violence, the difference is obviously domestic violence is somebody that you live with. Doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic partner. It can absolutely be a family member. And the same thing is true. And so that's the difference between dating violence or relationship violence, similar thing. Relationship violence is a little bit broader. It can be a brother, sister. It could be a parent and a child that don't live together, but do have a volatile relationship. So all those things are reportable. Those are all the kinds of things that you need to report. Go ahead. So this is the definition of consent. Consent must be clear, knowing, voluntary. If you say nothing, it's considered passive, and that's not consent. And just because we might have had sex in the past doesn't mean I've consented to sex now. Just because in the past I've consented to this particular act doesn't mean that I'm going to consent now. You have to get consent that's clear, that's voluntary. That means if I've been drinking alcohol, if we've been out partying, that means a whole another level of paying attention. So what if both parties are drunk? That's when my life gets really, really complicated. We have to investigate that. But generally speaking, whoever was the initiator is the one who's responsible for getting consent. Generally speaking. That, obviously there's all kinds of circumstances that could vary that, but that's generally what you have to do. It also makes a difference as to whether or not you have had a relationship with this person. Is this the first time you're having sex, or is this the 21st time you're having sex? Because you can, someone who might have to make the determination about whether you've sexually assaulted someone or not is going to look at how long have you been in a relationship with this person. If this is the first time, you're going to have probably more need to have clear consent than if you've been in a relationship and you sort of know each other and you know what certain actions and words mean because you know the person because you've been in a relationship with them. So the better you know somebody or the more familiar you are, that could make a difference. But in any case, you always have to have consent. Any questions about that? Okay. No, that's fine. So any consent is not valid if it was forced because of what we talked about before, coercion, intimidation, or threats. If they're incapacitated, as I mentioned before, it could be alcohol, it could be drugs, could be a mental impairment, could be a mental health impairment. It could be someone not taking their drugs or somebody taking too many of their drugs. It could be, certainly you would think it was obvious, but you'd be surprised sometimes it isn't. You can't have sex with someone who's asleep or unconscious. And so if you want to look it up in Maine law, or if you have a question, you can talk to Title IX Student Services, and we can sort of give you more information if you're concerned about consent or if you have a student asking questions. Go ahead. Sexual misconduct. One situation we had is we had a brother and a sister, and the sister was allegedly sexually assaulted while in high school by another high school student. And both the high school student who was the assaulter and the assaultee came here. And the brother saw the other guy. I don't know what happened in high school, how they adjudicated it or not. But the brother put up over every residence hall and practically every building on campus, this guy is a rapist. Can't do that. The guy may or may not be a rapist, but you can't do that. So that's kind of where we're going on this, because sexual misconduct, whether it's rape or anything like that, you can't retaliate against anybody. Even if it's happened here while the person is a student, report it. This sexual misconduct is some of the stuff that sort of surrounds the sort of periphery types of behavior. Peeping Tom, voyeurism. We've had people in the residence hall take their cell phone and stick it under the shower or under the bathroom door and take pictures. That's peeping Tomery. Possession of child pornography. I think Scott was involved in a case where someone was like 3 weeks from getting their PhD in astrophysics. I'm not even lying. Like, I can't even barely spell astrophysics, let alone what it might take to be a PhD, but had tens of thousands of child porn on the computer. didn't get that degree. So take that very seriously. And I know that it's out there, child porn, regular porn, it's out there in a big way. And I would tell you, just sort of as an aside, a lot of our students get their sexual information that way. So understand that their sexual maturity is probably fairly low, no matter if sex education is required in their high school or not. What they think is normal, they get from the media, including porn and porn sites. So those are sexual misconduct, also violations of the policy and the conduct code. Stalking is another one that we get, unrequited love. They have a crush on someone, the person rebuffs them, and then that is not an uncommon thing to happen, particularly as I mentioned before. We have very socially immature people sometimes, particularly, again, like I said before, where they really haven't had the opportunity in the last year or two to actually develop those social skills. And so stalking is another thing we are very concerned about. Go ahead. So we take a bystander intervention model, and that's where you come in. Notice that something has happened, and this might be for you personally, it might be for a colleague, might be for a student that you teach. Take responsibility for providing help, decide how you can help. The easiest thing you can do is call 911. I will give you, no, I'm trying to think. If you go on the University of Maine police website, they have a great app called Black Bear Safe. And I would recommend that you download that. So if you're walking, this is a very safe campus, by the way. But if you're walking around campus, or if any of your students at night, you can have a virtual or a physical person walk with you so you feel safe. They can provide it, be on the phone with you as you walk. They can actually use GPS in your phone to track you. There are blue lights along campus, so if you get in an emergency, whether your vehicle won't start or you think someone's following me. So I would encourage you to go to the University of Maine Police website and download the Black Bear app. It's called the Black Bear Safe app. Go ahead. All right, that's what I talked about before, what we must report. They might, even if they, and just so you know, sometimes we get the concern, well, I've got this great relationship with a student and I'm afraid that, by reporting, they're going to know I said something and now they're going to hate me. Students know, because this is not a new requirement, it was true in high school as well, it's true in college, that employees have to report. So believe it or not, they tell you stuff because they expect you to do something. They actually, they'll never tell you that, but that's exactly why they're telling you, and that's exactly why they don't go to the police. They feel much more comfortable with talking to you. But they do expect you to say something, and that's why they're telling you. So don't ever worry about that. And sometimes if you don't want us to use your name, we won't. We'll just say a concerned person on campus was, said that you might be having some trouble about X. They might figure it out, but we won't use your name if you don't want us to. If you don't care, then we'll say, well, Johnny, Janie, Jimmy said that you might be having some trouble. So they don't have to take the help we offer, but we want to reach out to everyone who might be needing help. So there you go. There's some places to report. Yeah, one more. Yeah, thank you. So Equal Opportunity is located in North Stevens Hall. Student Life is in room 315, and I've got that. I think I have that on a different slide somewhere. I have that. I thought I put that in the presentation, but maybe I didn't. But Student Life and Title IX Student Services is located on the 3rd floor of the Memorial Union. Equal Opportunity is located in North Stevens Hall on the ground floor. And I will put on the website there where you can submit all kinds of things. I think I put on that first slide the bias stuff, but I also put on there students of concern, that's largely mental health or behavioral concerns. I'll put on there where you report for Title IX related issues, and all of these can be anonymous if you want to make them that way. All right. I will tell you one last thing before Anila takes over, and that is, if it's an emergency, don't report online. If immediate help is needed, you need to call 911. All right? So, thank you, Anila. So if you have a student that needs immediate help because you're worried that they're going to do harm to themselves or others, you need to call 911. Otherwise, you can refer it online and you can use your name or not. Okay? Any last questions before I hand it over to Anila? Oh, I'm sorry. Sarah's next. My bad. Any questions? Okay, now that I've scared you all, here you go.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Henry, and I'm the Director of Student Accessibility Services at the University of Maine. Our office works with students who have disabilities. I can actually click, I think. Let me just go around and perfect. Okay. All right. So what is a disability? What do you think? All right. What is a disability? What do you think about when you hear that word? Examples, definitions. A physical or mental impairment. Yeah. Someone who engages in the world in a non-traditional way. So there's a difference between a diagnosis and a disability, right? So sometimes people will say that a person is disabled or a person might have a condition. There's different words, but for my purposes today, I'm going to talk to you about the university and your responsibility to provide accommodations to students with disabilities. So in general terms, from a legal perspective, a disability is a condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. And from a medical perspective, there's certain models of disability. From a medical perspective, a disability is a condition that can be diagnosed and treated. But there's another perspective as well, the social model of disability, which is an emerging model that really reshapes and reframes the discussion about what is disability. With the medical and the legal models, the problem is with the person, right? We need to fix the person. We need to change something for the person. With the social model of disability, the problem is with the conditions. So disability and the need for accommodation is created by a world that isn't designed for everybody. So if every building had ramps, everybody who was using a wheelchair or forearm crutches or had difficulty with mobility could get into the building. It also helps people who have strollers. It also helps people who have lots of other reasons, like their arms are full of groceries, leaving a store. There's lots of different reasons why the spares would benefit everybody. So the problem is with the world. And under the social model, there's lots of ramifications to what happens. People with disabilities could be more isolated. People with disabilities might not have the same opportunity to get jobs. They might have inaccessible transportation. They might be directly discriminated against. And some examples are things like sign language interpreters, that we don't have enough of them, special schools, stairs, not ramps, and no lifts. So what's an accommodation? Who knows what an accommodation is? Ever heard that word so I'm not talking about a hotel room. Different context. Any ideas? What is an accommodation? Very nice. It's a means of providing access so that person can engage in the same activities, events, jobs, curriculum, building access that every other person can. So on our campus, students request accommodations through my office, Student Accessibility Services. We review documentation and we have a process to determine reasonable accommodations. It's an individualized process. So that student comes in, meets with myself or one of our other professional staff members. We talk with them about their educational history. We talk with them about how they're doing. We talk with what helped them in high school, what was hard for them, or at another school, or in life. We talk about accommodations that they could get here. We agree on those accommodations, and then we put them in place. On our campus, we provide an accommodation letter to those students that has a list of what their accommodations are. And then we send that to the students in an email. And then the student will get that to the instructor of the course. And so usually that's as an email attachment that they send that letter. Some examples of accommodations would be testing accommodations. That's the most common example. So how many of you are teaching a course where there are tests or helping instruct a course where there are tests? Okay, so there's a pretty good chance that you'll have somebody in the class who needs extra time on tests or a low distraction place where they can take that test. So those are the two most common accommodations at the University of Maine, but there's lots of others. So testing accommodations could include a reader for a person who has a learning disability or who has is blind or low vision. It might be test assistive technology, so a screen reader that that person can read the test with. It might be a scribe if the person has a physical disability. Other examples would be note-taking accommodations. Sometimes we will hire peer note takers if a student needs it. We also have some assistive technology that students can use to record the class. And less common accommodations would include extra time to complete assignments or additional absences. And sometimes those accommodations are requested probably the most often by people who have chronic health conditions. So if someone is, a perfect example is I'm working with a student who has cancer and is on chemotherapy. And the days after the student has the chemotherapy, sometimes she's okay and she can go to class, and sometimes she gets more physical symptoms from that. And she might miss a class occasionally because of that. All right. So the process, again, I've sort of reviewed that for you. They come in, they meet with us, we do the letter, they send the letter to you. The letter will be on our department letterhead dated for the current semester. And then they bring it to you generally as an email attachment. Syllabus statement. So there's required syllabus statements that have to go on every syllabus. I'm guessing that most of the syllabi for your courses are already completed. Give me some nods if that's true. Yeah. And so the syllabus will have on it that statement. This is a standard University of Maine accommodation statement. It's on the Provost website. It's on the CETL website. It's on our website. And I will tell you that one of the things students have anecdotally said to me is that if they're in a class and the lab TA or the recitation TA, the instructor mentions it out loud in class, it really normalizes that valuing people in our community with diverse learning needs makes a difference. So it actually destigmatizes disability to say, if you have an accommodation need and you have a letter, you're welcome to come and talk to me during my office hours or before or after class, okay? All right, I just want to talk a little bit about accessible course materials. So let's say that you are guiding a recitation group, or what are some of the other tasks that you're going to be doing with students? Just shout them out to me. Oh, come on, you have to have something you're going to be doing. Labs, okay. Groups. Performances, okay. So you find a wonderful video that you want to share with the students. Please check and make sure the video is captioned. Okay, and if it's not captioned, see if you can find a version that is. If a student is hard of hearing or deaf, it's absolutely essential and required that all of their videos and all of their streamed lectures be captioned. So closed captioning is post-production done for videos, including YouTube videos. And open captioning or real-time captioning would be done if you have Zoom lecture and it's streaming, there is the ability in Zoom to turn on auto captions. And you have to go into the settings to do that, but it's called Enable Live Transcription. And then everybody in the class can actually see the captions for everybody. And you can turn them on or turn them off so students can select that themselves. It's a really useful tool, not just for students who are deaf and hard of hearing, but if a student has attention problems or processing problem, if a student is a second language learner, there's lots of people who benefit from captions. If you find an awesome article that you want to share, the thing I ask you not to do is to take a paper copy of that article, zip it through a photocopier, convert it to a PDF, and send it to everybody. And the reason is because that photocopier is making an image. That file stops being text-based when it goes through the photocopier, and it can't be read by a screen reader. We have a number of students on campus who are blind or low vision or have a learning disability who use screen readers. And so if their materials can't be read by the screen reader, they don't have access to the materials. So doing these things, when you're creating your groups, when you're creating your courses, it's called universal design, designing your course universally so everybody has access. It's part of the university's commitment to provide access under the law, but it's also good practice. It also benefits everybody in the class. All right, so I got a couple of questions for you. What are you going to do when a student gives you an accommodation letter, either in person or by sending you an email attachment? What are you going to do? Read it. Excellent. That's a perfect start. Read it. What else? Acknowledge it. Thank them for sending it. Affirm that you're going to work with them to put their accommodations in place. If you have questions about it, you can ask the student general questions. If you have questions, you can also call our office. The person who's working, so each student has an individual professional staff member, and that's the name of our staff member that you'll see on the letter. So if it's one of my students, you're welcome to call me. And then my office contact information is right on the handout that I gave you all. And I've got our 3 professional staff members' names and our emails right on there. So how about if you have a student who comes to you and gives you an IEP or a 504 plan from high school and says, I get these accommodations. So you would send them over to our office because accommodations from high school don't necessarily transfer to college. Absolutely. That's exactly what I would like you to do. Some of them might. So if the student got extra time on tests in high school, they're probably going to get extra time at the university. But if they had one-on-one tutoring for a course to make sure they were successful, our office doesn't provide that. Now, the university may provide tutors, but it doesn't come through our office. That's a service. It's different than an accommodation. Okay, couple more. How about if the student comes up to you and says, you know, I'm having trouble remembering things and my notes aren't terrific. Can I tape record the class? What would you do? I see some no's. I see some maybes. Things have been recorded for the last year, so why not? So it's really okay. That's an example of, in some cases, it may be on an accommodation letter that says this student can record class, even if typically students don't record the class. But lots of teachers, lots of instructors are just fine with that. Lots of instructors have been doing it for the last year and found that lots of students benefit from it. So they may ask you if you would be willing to record class, or they may want to record it themselves. That's an example of something that's sort of in this gray area. It could be an accommodation, but it's really okay if you want to just do that. Now, what if the student says to you, I'm really nervous about COVID, and I want to know if I can take this class remotely, and it's a face-to-face class? What would you do? And this could happen. You can refer them to the faculty member who's overseeing that. Yep. If they say it's because they have a disability, a medical condition, you can refer them to our office. I had a conversation with Dean Haddad from the College of Liberal Arts. Generally, the guidance is no, we're not going to change the format of in-person face-to-face classes to remote for individual students. We're not going to make every class at the University of Maine a hybrid learning class. Okay? If a student has a cold and they want to, can you give me the notes or the PowerPoint from this one class because I'm sick? That's different than changing a whole modality. If a student comes to our office and asks that because they have a disability, we go through a pretty in-depth process of talking to them, reviewing their documentation, looking at the syllabus and the curricular expectations, talking to the professor about the format of the class, and determining if it is a reasonable accommodation. And in some cases it is, and in some cases it's not. All right, so this is us, Student Accessibility Services, University of Maine, 121 East Annex. There's our website and there's our phone number. All right, and then I think I've got one more general slide. Yep. So sometimes students disagree. There is a complaint process. There's a variety of options. The student administrative appeal process is outlined in the student handbook. So if one of my staff members approves an accommodation and a student disagrees with something, they can come to me. The initial step is to talk to the student, the administrator who made a decision, then that person's supervisor, and then the chair of their department or department head, and then the vice president. So that's the administrative appeal process. Other ways students might file complaints are through the University of Maine System Office of Equal Opportunity. And then there's some external organizations that also handle complaints. And this can be for a wide variety of reasons, including all of those categories of discrimination that we had at the beginning. All right, Anila.
Let me just mention, because Sarah did a good job and she mentioned COVID. So these are the COVID expectations so that you know what they are. Because I answer the COVID hotline and believe me, we get a lot of questions. Basically, October 15th is the drop dead date. By that time, every student must be one of three things: fully vaccinated, which means 14 days past whatever the last shot is, whether they got the 1-shot or the 2-shot vaccine. They must be fully remote, not on campus at all, or they must have received an exemption, and then they are treated as an unvaccinated student. It is very unlikely that they will hear about their exemption request before classes begin. We are telling them that. There are hundreds of them across the system. The system folks are reviewing them. It doesn't really change what the student is supposed to do. Because if they get the exemption, they're unvaccinated. If they're in a status of not knowing yet, they're still an unvaccinated student. And unvaccinated students must be tested weekly and wear a mask indoors. That guidance may change. It's a moving target. But right now, as we speak today, those are the two things unvaccinated people need to do. In fact, no matter your vaccination status, when you're indoors now until the end of the month of September, which that might be extended, everyone has to wear a mask. So if students ask you about that, you can refer them to the COVID hotline, which is 581-2681. You can refer them to the University of Maine Return website. God bless the chancellor and the president. They send out weekly messages, so there's no way you don't know, because they're always happy to tell you all kinds of stuff. And so in any case, I just wanted to clarify that it's pretty simple. Everyone was supposed to have uploaded either their request for an exemption or their vaccine card by last Friday. I'm happy to report that compliance is quite high. I don't know that you're going to have a lot of problems that way. I think there's close to 70% of employees, without it being mandatory, are already fully vaccinated. And I don't know about the general student population, but something on the order of more than 85% of the residential students are already fully vaccinated. That's outstanding. That's absolutely outstanding. But I can't speak for the general population, but I can tell you for residential students that we have that information. So one of three things by October 15th, fully remote, fully vaccinated, or having received an exemption. If they aren't one of those three things by October 15th, it's not my decision, but somebody's going to make a decision about what they need to do. So thank you, Anila, for letting me steal some of your time.
I know, my 5 minutes.
We are offering, thank you. We are offering free vaccination clinics through the end of September. And in a meeting I was in this morning, they were talking about boosters for the rest of the folks that got vaccinated earlier, as well as all those students who got vaccinated just recently. In about 8 months, they'll need a booster. So they are talking about booster clinics as well. They just haven't been scheduled yet.
Any other questions? Okay, everybody stand up real quick. Okay, and do a nice stretch. And this goes into like Kenda's time also. So my time hasn't technically started. All right, stretch, stretch, stretch. Because we're going to tap into some fun parts and educational fun. All right, now have a seat. Hi, friends. My name is, have a seat quickly. My name is Anila Karunakar. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Director for Diversity and Inclusion here at Maine. So happy to be here. In fact, it's my first time, so I'm kind of excited. I'd like to first make an acknowledgement that we are standing on Marsh Island, which belongs to the Penobscot Nation. That falls under the Wabanaki tribal nations. And it's so important for me to make sure that when we talk about equity, when we're talking about inclusion, when we're talking about all this other stuff that kind of says, this is how we want to bring together an equitable space where people are not harassed, people are able to succeed and have access to all the resources. This falls in line with that. Part of it is because it speaks to voices that have been erased, narratives that have been erased, history that has been erased, and it's our attempt to give voice. The land acknowledgement that the University of Maine, in collaboration with representatives of the tribal nations, drafted is available online at on our website. Which is the college, University of Maine website. So please, if you have space on your syllabus, it is so important to put it on there. And now once you put it on there, you need to figure out if students come and ask you, hey, why did you put this on there? That you know why. So don't put it on there because I'm saying, hey, put it on there. But it's important to know why. Centering ourselves, especially when we talk about research and utilizing land resources, it's important for us to acknowledge that. Use of pronouns. I know that we had a slide under Kenda's. There is that. Why is it important for us to use pronouns? Why was it important for me to say my pronouns are she, her, hers? Or is it? Yes, Fred. Okay, it's an attempt for maybe as allowing students to feel free to share their pronouns. Why else? Yes. You can't always tell somebody's pronouns just by looking at them. Why else? Say that again. Sorry, the squeak. The door squeaked. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. It's to provide a way for people to access and be present in their identities. So me, I present as female, I'm cisgender. I lean into sort of what presents as sort of female traits. However, When Anila uses pronouns, it is me standing in solidarity with people who may not use pronouns based on how I perceive them. So it is sort of decentering myself, saying, hey, you look like, no. We don't want to make that assumption ever. And it gives access to people who can say, hey, these are my pronouns. Or it gives access to people to share, say that, hey, thank you for saying that. I'm still not quite sure about what pronouns I want to use. Maybe I want to go with they, them, theirs, with these, theirs. Maybe I just want to use my name. But just allowing the access allows you to be present and fully able to participate in class when you're all able to be there. One of the biggest things that, especially if this last year has taught us, is that paying attention to environment in class. So I know for me that personally, it was, the day after Breonna Taylor was shot, it was sort of, it wasn't like the first murder of the year. And it came at the it came at that moment for me, it was, oh my goodness, another person. And it was so hard for me to show up to work where it was business as usual. So allowing for us to even wrestle, even if it means, hey, we don't have much time, but I just want a quick check-in to say, this is really hard. Hey, there was this terrible hurricane, Henry, that just hit Rhode Island. Anyone from Rhode Island in here? Yeah, it's to say like, hey, there was 100,000 people lost power. There was like 10 feet of rain. Is your family okay? It allows you to say that, educate class, and to make sure that even as we have business to carry on, I'm able to show up in this space. Understanding DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We throw these words out all the time. I'm paying attention to the time, and I hear Ken on my shoulder. Is help me understand, when we say diversity, what comes to mind? How do we define these terms? When we say diversity, right? What comes to mind? Okay, absolutely. What else? Yes, absolutely. Sexualities. Okay, celebration. I mean, if we care about diversity, right? It sort of seems to be the buzz thing right now. DEI, we hear that all the time. Committees and statements. And yet diversity is representation. It is the sum of human differences and the ways that we can be different from one another and unique. So how many of us went to public school? How many went to private school? Homeschool? Montessori school? And how many School of Hard Knocks? Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to slice that. That's what I mean, is that I can walk in here and make complete assumptions about the people in my room. And diversity is saying, whoa, wait a minute. I see this, and then there's things that I don't see. So paying attention to both seen diversity, which is race, ethnic representation, culture, and unseen diversity, which could be abilities, disabilities, but can also be my sexual orientation, my socioeconomic status, or my socioeconomic status, my age. my immigration, my nationality, it could be all those things. And so if I'm saying that I care about diversity, and that's kind of like, hey, look at all this representation in my class. What does inclusion mean? Okay, TAs, is it, I'm sure your brains haven't stopped working. Come on, look alive. I even let you stretch. Yes, friend, what is inclusion? Yeah, so if I'm making the assumption that I'm creating my curriculum, right, or my syllabus, and everyone knows, I'm making the assumption that everybody knows how to write a research paper. But there's some folks who've been homeschooled and, all of these different diverse backgrounds in how they've done school, writing styles. I might be a little disappointed, right? Because in my mind, there's this, so inclusion is saying, hey, if I want to make sure that whoever's in the room, I want to make sure that they're able to be part of this process. So giving voice at the table, if I have a project, versus I want to make sure that all my diverse representations are there at that table if I'm going to work on this project. So if that's diversity, representation, inclusion is making sure everyone's here at this table. What is equity? Oh, whoa, yes, that's so abstract. Yes, it is, right? Like in the sense that it's not equal. We're not talking about equality, like you get 2 pieces of candy and you get 2 pieces of candy. Well, what if you're diabetic? I do not want to give you candy, right? You paying attention. So that it's not about equality. What else? What else comes to mind when you think about equity? Yes. Be long-winded. Yes. Sure. Or what if I don't like apples? So equity is exactly that. It's a system issue. And if you're working on your syllabus or you're carrying out a syllabus, that is a system issue. So it is about making sure that the resources, and if we're going back to that research paper, is instead of me saying, hey, everybody, I think that this is so relevant to our topic, you get to choose, I want to make sure, hey, this topic is really inclusive. So now go do this research paper. Being equitable is saying then, here's how we write a research paper, or here are ways that you can create your research paper, and these are the stories. So it's about a system, it's about creating a system. For example, real quick, if I was here trying to be inclusive and I have, here's my design right here, the way I deliver my curriculum, my sort of design, my instruction, in an equitable manner is to remove the barriers that are standing in the way of me communicating my message to you, right? And so, अगर मैं चाहूं तो ये पूरी presentation मैं अपनी भाषा में कर सकती हूँ, है कि नहीं? कौन समझता है कि मैं मेरे भाई लोग, that is what equity is. is me making sure that I am taking away the barrier so I can make sure that the resources you need are reaching you in the way that you're able to accept them, right? Because I can switch languages on you, friends. So thinking about Project Implicit, and this is how you do your work, is to do the work. Being a DEI person is doing DEI work. Project Implicit is a great way to do. Harvard University has this great way to help you address your biases, understanding DEI within your disciplines. Especially last year, so much great stuff came out of it. Inclusive pedagogies, of course, refers to service, strives that we make that meet the needs of all students. So every time when people sometimes, I'm not saying every time, sometimes when people think about what DEI is, they think that it's for those people. For me, it's okay, but I have to do it for those people. But if we're really about creating an equitable system, it's for everybody. Some of the things that we do in our office, again, it is, I repeated, I really wanted you to know where we were. So it's on there twice. We're in the Memorial Union. Come and hang out with us. We have these centers, and the work we do is kind of freaking phenomenal. So come check us out, friends. And wait, oh no, the last part did not get uploaded here. So one thing is that we serve all students. We make sure that the programs that we do are inclusive and equitable and hold the integrity of the students that we represent within our centers. We have lots of incredible programs that we do through the year. So if there's things that you are thinking, hey, why as a class, let's do this together. Come, do it with you and your friends. Don't make it, doesn't have to be educational, but we have lots of amazing trainings, lots of educational resources. So come check us out. I'm on the 3rd floor of the Union. I have my cards right here. So when you do have a break, come and hang, pick those up. And I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Orlina, and she's going to wrap us up for the day. Well, for our presentation. I don't know what you all have going.
Hi, everyone. I know it's almost lunchtime, and I always get like 2 minutes at the end of a very long presentation with lots of information. So apologies if I keep you a few extra minutes, because the content and resources that our office offers are very important for your students in your class that come from other countries and cultures. So how many of you have studied abroad outside of your home culture? Okay, a lot of you. How many of you have been in an environment where you felt like you were a minority person, linguistic, racially, socioeconomically? Great. Well, the experience of international students when they enter the United States in a US classroom oftentimes feels like being in the minority all the time. Could be linguistic, an accent, or still developing a stronger English competence. Could be racial. Most of the international students in the United States, and that's true for you, Maine, come from Asia, Africa. And so they can be perceived as African-American and differentially racialized this way. There's a lot of content on that if you want to look for some videos. I am international myself. I was a student here, and still after 20 years in Maine, every time I start speaking, people say, where are you from? So, and you can see I'm pretty fluent. So again, our brain really jumps to thinking that if somebody sounds different, they are from somewhere else. So be on, to tag along with what Danila was saying, don't assume that if somebody looks different, behaves different, or has an accent, they're not necessarily from here, because you can also do some microaggressions this way by a student who may be Asian American or may have grown up in Maine, but you may perceive them as from somewhere else. So I want to make this a little bit more interactive, so I'm not just speaking at you, but what are some of the things you have observed from classmates or other educational experiences that really can set up an international student for success? Or yourself when you were studying abroad or you were in a different environment? Yes. That's a great point. Think of how you're grading and how you're providing feedback. So a lot of faculty will provide feedback on grammar and spelling or refer a student to the writing center, but they will have clear expectations of how written English is graded. And by the way, when I was a TA here, some of my American students had poorer grammar than some of our international students. And so that's important to consider as well. How are you serving all of your students who may come from environments where their English, written English is not as strong? What else? Yes. Yes, and that goes with inclusion, and Ella spoke about that, right? Recognizing one's heritage in the classroom is also important. And so being mindful of students who may be celebrating a Muslim holiday or Hindu holiday, creating space that students can share that in the classroom and be themselves and bring it into the classroom, right? That's very important. What else? What else do you think is important? Yes, grading systems. And that's also a very good discussion to just be transparent in the class around the grading and how grading happens. And that's also another topic that's also confusing for American students, 100 grade scale, ABCD, what's a failing grade? So that is really good pedagogical practices for all learners, including international students, to really explain what that means. And so you can also invite students to talk to you after the class. I was just preparing my syllabus for my first year seminar, and I was going through thinking, okay, if I've never been in a US classroom, what would trip me up in that? So what we do in our office is we try to provide academic support and referral to academic resources and services on campus from a cross-cultural perspective. And so trying to identify the rich experiences our international students enter our classrooms, acknowledging that, but also helping them adapt to a different academic system. In our office, we also offer a orientation. We're right now in it. We provide continuous orientation sessions, including one on academic honesty and what does plagiarism look like in the US, which is vastly different in other educational systems, vastly different. So a student may be preparing a written exam or a paper for you, thinking that they're doing the best they have been taught to do, and yet be really plagiarizing very heavily, because plagiarism is seen very, very differently in other academic systems. And so this may be something you can just Google and understand how it works. And we approach it from an educational perspective. And so take the time to explain to a student what it is, refer them to the Writing Center for help with citations and so forth, and use us as a resource. So we cover that very heavily in the first year seminar for undergraduate students, but also we invite the conduct office to come and do a presentation for students. Also consultations. You may have a student from a country where you may not be familiar with. So it's up to you to try to educate yourself. So I'll just pick Bulgaria. I'm from Bulgaria. Google it. Find out something about Bulgaria. So when that advisee comes in your office hour, or especially if you have a smaller class, you say, "Hey, I know where Bulgaria is. I know it's in Eastern Europe. Don't mix it with Bolivia," which one time happened to me. Make sure you have a little trivia for them, because that's the way you can really make that student comfortable. In a lot of other cultures, students will never talk to a professor. There's no office hours, right? And so some of the different education system students come from have vastly different behavior and expectations than the US. And so explain what your office hours are for. We recently had a student who thought that office hours are when the professor does their work, right? And so just be mindful of how you're setting some of those expectations up. If you need more resources, reach out to me, reach out to one of my colleagues. We're happy to talk to you. We work with students. We have over 80 countries represented on campus, and we can give you some points and tips about what's happening. So again, customs, expectations, academic expectations in the classroom, we try to debunk those, but please, please, please be as transparent as possible. We can talk to you about foreign academic system and their difference. Also, what are some different culturally responsive interventions? One of the examples that I have is that if you're setting up group work in your classroom, be also mindful of gender expectations in different religions. If you don't know about that, work with your professor to figure that out. So if you're pairing a Muslim woman who may be coming from a very conservative background with a male student who may be totally oblivious to behavior expectations, gestures, personal space, touching and so forth, like even tap. Anyways, that's important. That's what inclusion means, that you're setting up an environment in your classroom that a student can succeed, and also opening up a space that they can talk to you about that. Again, we know all of our students pretty well, especially on the undergraduate side. And so if you're noticing somebody who you feel like may be distressed, falling behind, not showing up to class, just send me an email and I'll provide my information. We serve as quite the safety net. With graduate students, some of your peers, there's support through the department, through their peers. So we serve mostly as the immigration office for them, and we provide support as needed. But on the undergraduate side, we're much more hands-on with students because their needs are different. So a few tips. I have a handout on names. For years, my name was mispronounced. And at first I was like, I don't care, call me whatever. And at some point I was like, you know what, folks, you got to learn how to do it. So when I met Anila, she said, oh, I'm Anila. And I said, well, how do you pronounce your last name? She's like, oh, just say it how you want. And I said, no, I want to make sure that I pronounce it correctly. And Anila is Anila Karunakar. Did I get it right? Woohoo. Learn how to pronounce the first name. Sometimes students may be using an Americanized name. And if they introduce themselves this way, have a conversation with them if that's really appropriate. Don't make up names. Don't try to pronounce if you're not sure how it is. A name carries so much weight, so much hierarchy, so much potential for inclusion or lack of inclusion in a space. Avoid slang. We use so many metaphors in English, especially sports metaphors. I cannot even tell you how many baseball metaphors I had to Google when I started. But look through the lens of if you've not been in a US environment where, most learners of English language, when they come from a different environment, they are reading Shakespeare, they're reading Dickens. They're watching TV, obviously American TV, but there's so much slang that it's just not known. So make sure that you're mindful of that when you're presenting, when you're providing feedback, so you can really help. And I still use slang. I just try to catch myself and provide a synonym or try to explain what something is. Really important not to tokenize or essentialize students, regardless of their background. And so make sure that as you're working with students, you don't say, well, tell me what's the Chinese perspective, right? And I think that's pretty common knowledge of behavior to avoid, because again, students cannot speak on behalf of their country. And also there's some really sensitive topics around foreign policy, human rights, all sorts of issues that are happening in their country. And so if you're not sure what area you're trading on, just stay away from it until you can really research it a little bit to know what to do. A lot of the students come from a very strict rote learning system, meaning that they're expected to look at content, memorize content, and reproduce it as it is. And so critical thinking, the way we know about it, is just not present in some educational systems. And so if you're observing students who are really not applying the knowledge or not absorbing the knowledge the way they should, just pull them aside and have a conversation with them. We can pair them up with an upper class international student, a graduate student, fellow graduate student, to have a conversation about expectations, about learning and comprehension, exams and testing. Participation. In a lot of other educational systems, there is no participation. My sister studied in Germany and she had a lecture of 500 students. The professor came, lectured, left. Not a word all semester. So if you have students who are for the first time in a US educational classroom, they may have a hard time speaking up. It may take them a while to participate. And so think of pedagogical practices that provide students with different ways of engaging. Brightspace gives us so many opportunities now for discussion online, for written assignments, and so forth. And again, your faculty who are working with you will have some good practices around that. I mentioned group work. I find that for international students, that is often kind of the hardest component of education here to adapt to if they've not had experience with it. And my kids, when they started in kindergarten, they were already getting socialized through group work. In a lot of other countries, everybody does their own work, they finish their PhD and on they go. And so that's just something that we need to be mindful of at times. If you don't know what a high context and a low context culture is, I don't have time to go over that, but please Google it. It's really important. I recently was talking to a student and I said, so are you ready for the semester? Did you buy your textbooks? Are you all set? And the student said, textbooks. Yes, I got them. I will go to the bookstore tomorrow. And so I said, which one is it? We're in the US are very direct. And so in some cultures, the concept of saying no, embarrassing yourself is really big. And so that's just one component of the cultural context. So there's so many resources out there. In a lot of culture, students, are not used to direct communication. They're not used to the way we operate in the US environment. And so just, check it out. So you're better prepared as an instructor in general around that. Reading the nonverbals. I just had a faculty who emailed me and said, I just met with the student who is really not ready for the semester, not registered, no textbooks, nothing ready. And the student just did not look like he cared. And I know the student well, and I said, you just have to remember this particular culture, nonverbals look very, very different. Facial expressions are very different. The way we'll express anxiety, concern, happiness, joy, both in our faces, but in our bodies looks so different than what we're used to here. And so be mindful of that, because something that you may be reading as one particular emotion may actually be a very different attempted expression of a totally different emotion. We also have students who may be on the spectrum and so forth. So there's so many ways to understand a situation. And so without trying to overwhelm you, these are just little things to just plug in your brain. And if you identify that something, you're just like, I wonder why this is happening, talk to your faculty, talk to your peers, reach out to us, and we'll be happy to consult for you.